Welcome back. In the previous lesson, we talked about the Agile concept, what it means to be Agile, which is about having an adaptive development approach. And that's where we go on with the project, we create increments and use them to receive feedback. And with that feedback, we will understand our environment and adapt. That's instead of predicting everything, which is the other approach. In order to be Agile, in order to have an adaptive development system, we need to have a methodology or a framework. We need to know how to do that because Agile itself is only a concept. It's very abstract. There are many different frameworks and methodologies for that, including these. These are, except for Kanban, all the first generation Agile systems. XP used to be the most famous one and probably the most influential one. That's what really made Agile what we know nowadays. Most people don't know about XP nowadays, but it's had its impact in all of us. And it stays there forever, probably. But anyway, XP is mainly about the development layer. And it's really focused on practices and techniques. Things like test-driven development, pair programming, refactoring, those things were the key parts of XP. And the most important thing was that XP created a completely integrated set of those practices, something that is very effective. It's more than having isolated practices. Some people nowadays believe that Scrum was originally created to be a management layer above XP because XP didn't have any of those things. And that's also why Scrum doesn't have any techniques and practices in it. But, well, that's only some people. The other thing is DSDM. DSDM is also one of the first ones. And by the way, if you know the Agile Manifesto, we won't go through the manifesto in this course, but if you know about that, people who created these, the first four, and some other people were those who got together and created the Agile Manifesto and the Agile Principles, all of them. So DSDM is another methodology. It's very complete and it includes everything of many different roles and responsibilities, many different types of artifacts, many different processes, and it really reminds you of Prince2. In case you know what Prince2 is, it's a project management methodology. DSDM was created for more complex projects, larger projects with multiple teams. It's still maintained. There are new versions of DSDM, and they have certification programs as well. Agile PM, for example, Agile Project Management, is a certification program based on DSDM, not based on Scrum. The other thing that used to exist in the past was Crystal, which is a concept and a family of different methods, each of them created for a certain type of project based on the complexity of its environment and size of project and so on. It was a very interesting concept, but it didn't grow really. So practically all of them retired except for Scrum. And it continued up until now. It grew. And a little bit after that, we also had this concept of Kanban development, which is a little bit different from the rest of them because all of them have some form of iteration, like the sprints in Scrum. But Kanban development doesn't have those iterations, and instead it has a continuous flow of work, which seems better to some people. But on the other hand, the iterations really create that focus and adds more discipline to what we do. It's very helpful. Although in the recent changes to Scrum, the way they changed what it means to have a sprint and the way you manage your sprint backlog and what it means to have an increment, it's somehow means that it's as if we don't really have a sprint. They want to be as flexible as possible. They don't want to be seen as something old-fashioned in Scrum. But anyway, that's a different topic. All right, so these are different ways of being agile, and Scrum is one of them. Now, a few things you may want to know about the Scrum. The first one is important. When you talk about the Scrum, you should never mention the word methodology. They really hate it. They want to be referred to as a framework. Now, if you ask them, they will explain a lot of things on the difference between a methodology and a framework, but in reality, there is no clear definition and distinction between the two of them. The difference is more a matter of degree, not a matter of type or kind. Usually, we refer to bigger things as methodologies and to smaller, minimal things as frameworks. Frameworks are usually things that only explain the bare minimum that you must have, and then you will add the extra things to make it practical. But methodologies also explain the optional things that you may want to have in your system, plus the things that you may want to add to them. Many people in the Scrum community say that a methodology is prescriptive, but a framework is not. But I really don't understand them, because Scrum itself is prescriptive. It tells you what to do. That's what it means. It doesn't tell you as much as you have in DSDM, for example, which is a methodology, or in Prince2, which is a methodology, but it still tells you. It tells you that, for example, your sprints must be time boxed. It's telling you don't extend the duration of a sprint. That's prescription. But anyway, you need to know that. If you say that Scrum is a really good methodology, there will be some people who will just be careful. All right, the other thing. Some people refer to Scrum as a process or technique, but Scrum wants to be known as a wrapper for processes and techniques. Now, there are lots of things to talk about here. One of them is techniques and practices that you may want to use. For example, you may want to use pair programming or test-driven development or other things. It's up to you. It's up to the type of project you have, type of people you have in your project, and you can add it to your Scrum project. That's okay. Scrum doesn't have any of those things. You may want to have planning poker. You may want to use user stories, story points. None of these things are included in a Scrum. The Scrum framework is just the bare minimum, and it's something you can use to form your project. When you add other things, when you add, for example, planning poker, Scrum helps you know where to use it, when to use it, and how to combine it with other things. That's the role of a Scrum. So, it's not a technique, it's a wrapper for techniques. When it comes to process, again, some of you who are more serious about these concepts, management concepts, you may say that, well, the whole Scrum is a process or a set of processes where we talk about sprints, going through them, and so on. Yeah, well, process is practically one of those curse words, maybe, in this community somehow. They don't really like it, like the way they don't like methodology. Each community has some taboos. That's the reality. Okay, there are two important bases for Scrum. One of them is what Scrum explains as empiricism, or previously they used to call it empirical process control theory. And this empirical process control theory is the alternative to defined process control theory. The defined process control theory is what I told you about in the predictive approach. That's where you define everything up front, almost, not exactly. But the empirical process is the one that I explained as an adaptive system. That's where you go on, observe your environment, and adapt to it based on empiricism. That's what it means. So practically, it means that Scrum uses an adaptive system. But for those of you who want to take the exam, you must know that empiricism is one of those important words for Scrum. The other thing is lean, the lean concept. It's a concept started in manufacturing, and it's about minimizing waste, increasing value, and so on, increasing quality, of course. Some people say that Agile is lean in the projects. That's the lean version suited for projects. But anyway, Scrum is influenced a lot by lean, according to Scrum. Okay, there are two other characteristics. You remember this. So we have sprints, and each sprint has a duration which is fixed. Later on, I will tell you that those concepts of having fixed durations, it's called time boxing. Okay, but it's not important now. So each sprint is, for example, a time box of 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. We go on with the project, and during the sprint, we create newer versions of our increments, newer versions of our product, which we call increments. And each increment has more features. It's about the product as a whole and also subsets of the product. So for example, you have, I could think of examples beforehand, but it's still not too late. I can do it. For example, you have CRM in your application. You want to have a CRM, customer relationship management. One way is to create all the features and then add them to your product in one go, in a big bang. And the other is to add it gradually. You will first create the core features that you need for your CRM. You add it there, you will see how it works, what are the things you need, and then you will add them in the next version, and again the next version. So instead of having one big bang product, you will have multiple increments of the product. Each increment adds more to the previous one. This is called incremental delivery, which is a characteristic we have in all Agile systems. Incremental delivery instead of big bang delivery, one at the end or one very infrequently. Now, when you think about it, we don't know what we're going to create in the future sprints, because it's an adaptive system. We want to create our increments, show them to the customer and end users, receive feedback, and use it to find our way, right? If we know everything up front, then it's not adaptive anymore. And therefore, when we don't know what we're going to create in, for example, 5 or 6 sprints from now, we cannot design it right now because it doesn't exist. We don't know the item. So what happens is that instead of like what we do in predictive projects, where we go step by step, we specify everything, and then we go and design everything, and then we build in everything, and then integrate and so on, we will repeat these development processes. These are called development processes. We will repeat them for each item separately. Whenever we want to add an item, in each sprint we are working maybe, for example, on 20 items. For each of them, we will specify it, design it, build it, integrate it, test it, and so on, instead of doing all of that up front. Therefore, what it means is that we are repeating our development processes. We are repeating the designing activities, the specification activities, the integration. We have continuous integration. It is repeated all the time. That's called iterative development. We have iterations where we repeat things. So these two are the two common characteristics of all Agile systems, including Scrum: iterative development and incremental delivery. Okay, so that was it. These first 3 lessons were kind of introduction. The first one, we had an overview of Scrum to use it as a foundation for the other lessons, the real lessons. In the second lesson, we talked about the concept of agile development, which is very important to remember all the time. It helps you answer a lot of questions in your projects. And this lesson, the third one, was about a few things about the Scrum, what it means to have a Scrum project. From now on, we're going to go through the details. In the next lesson, we'll start by talking about the Scrum events.